everybody. I'm Julie. Welcome back. Um, I believe that no one should slave over worksheets. So I wrote a guide for learning math from everyday life because when the world is your classroom, you're free to learn math that matters. Today I'm going to talk about the Boko math lifestyle as a way for inviting your family into a math rich life. Let's get started. This is Everyday Mathematics Part 2, How to Follow a Child's Curiosity to Conquer Your Math Anxiety and Help Them Succeed in Math. Today, I'm going to talk about easy ways to invite your family into the world of mathematics. Before I dive in, a quick recap. In Part 1, I talked about overcoming anxiety for the sake of our children and their learning. And I used the example of my discomfort with bugs and things that I did to encourage my kids' curiosity. And then what ended up happening was I learned alongside them. I created an experience-rich life, meaning I found experiences that I was comfortable with that would support their learning about bugs, like digging in the dirt in the backyard and gardening and investigating bugs while we were in nature, just on a hike or something like that. And I talked about cultivating a language-rich life from that, talking about experiences, finding resources to learn the language of entomology and zoology. That's the route I took, and we learned all sorts of stuff together. And I also talked about learning together. If we strengthen our relationship with the subject and we do it in concert with our child, then everyone learns, which is awesome. And that's what we're going to talk about today, what we can do to strengthen our relationship with mathematics together with our child. Our job is to provide math experiences and talk about them. So, what are some math experiences? These are everyday activities that are rich with opportunities to notice, talk about, and use math. And I call it the Boko math lifestyle. It entails time management, money management, getting outdoors, art and architecture appreciation, music, baking, and playing games. All awesome stuff that can happen on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. Let's look at time management. Time management is numbers heavy, but there's also a lot of figuring stuff out. So you'll say there are 10 more minutes left in this show. It's going to take us about an hour to get to where we're going, or things like that. Let's look at some of the real specific math stuff, like the units of time. Units are really important in measurement, and you can talk about time with your kids: seconds, minutes, hours, days, weeks, months, and years, decades, centuries, millennia. It goes on, and you can talk about the units of time. You can talk about the tools of time. You can investigate an analog clock. You can compare that to a digital clock and compare those things to sand timers. And solving time management problems. So things like setting goals, considering time constraints, and reflecting on how you spent your time. And, one of my favorite things is saying, hey, the cupcakes will be done in 3 minutes. Is that time for us to run upstairs and brush our teeth or something like that? Money management. Money management features a lot of numeracy, which is counting, as well as operations in algebra, which is figuring stuff out. The value of money. Just counting your pennies, nickels, dimes, quarters, and dollars gives you a lot of counting. But the minute you start counting by ones, fives, tens, 25s, and hundreds, you've stepped straight into multiplication and pre division skills. Savings. If your child can have an allowance, I highly recommend it because they will be learning addition and multiplication very quickly as they see how they can save their money to put it towards something that they want. And for older kids, they can start learning about compound interest. Spending naturally is subtraction and division. But all of these things are natural ways that you can talk about math in your everyday life. Getting outdoors, oh my goodness, it's all around good for you. Everyone needs to go get a forest bath on a regular basis, in my opinion. But as for math learning, there's a huge variety of topics to explore when you go outdoors. Naturalists count and categorize things, and this is data and numeracy. So just imagine going for a walk around the block. Together with your child, you could count the animals you saw. You could count how many dogs you saw, how many cats you saw, how many birds you saw. And then within each of those types of animals, you could go a little bit deeper. You could say, well, let's just think about all the birds we saw. What are the different types of birds? How many of red-winged blackbirds did we see versus robins? Shapes. If you are at a man-made place like a park or athletic field, you are likely to see a lot of really cool geometry. So skate parks usually have a lot of trapezoids, triangles, and rectangles. And athletic fields have a lot of rectangles and semicircles and other things like that. And then in the natural world, be on the lookout for the Fibonacci spiral because it's cool and it's all over the place. You can also talk about things like how a tree trunk is cylindrical and go on from there. There are seasonal patterns that you can observe. Watching changes in weather over time, like temperature and precipitation, you can look at it with your child over the course of the year and then from year to year. A lot of math to compare and contrast, I guess, all of the different things that are going on in the weather. And when you're investigating or on some sort of adventure outdoors, you will be using the tools of being outdoors, like maps, maybe a compass. And using those things, you'll be investigating scale and measurement and things like that. For instance, if you're at a campground or sporting complex and you need to find your campsite or your soccer field that you're going to be at, look at the map and figuring out how to get from where you are to where you need to be has a lot of good opportunities to talk about math. Art and architecture appreciation. This one has a lot of geometry and spatial relations in it. And depending how deep you go, it can also include algebra and data and measurement. Art is all about form, two-dimensional, three-dimensional forms, size, how the shapes go together. So you can observe art or you can make art and have a lot of conversations about shapes and how they go together. And architecture, building with blocks, looking outside. I mean, just looking around the neighborhood at all of the houses that are built, you can look for rectangles and semicircles and squares and triangles and all sorts of beautiful things just going for a walk around your neighborhood. And look for all those different shapes and how they go together. Music. Math is often considered a visual subject, And music has plenty of algebra on sheet music. The symbols that are representing sound that correspond to some key on the keyboard or some chord that you're strumming on the ukulele. But listening for math is something nearly everyone can do if you have a radio and you can hear. Consider the length of notes, the quarter note or the half note, the eighth notes. You can listen and hear length. You can hear tempo, how the tempo increases or decreases or stays the same. You can hear volume, the crescendo or decrescendo of any particular song. And like I said, the changes in tempo or volume. You can listen and try to count the number of instruments you hear: voice, string instruments, percussion, things like that. Lots of ways that you can listen for math when you listen to music. Baking. The tools and the process of baking are loaded with math. Now, I've never been much of a baker, but I got to tell you, when we put weekly baking into our schedule, my daughter and I have been doing a lot of conversations, having a lot of conversations about math. There's numeracy, counting ingredients. There's operations in algebra, having, doubling, or tripling a recipe, or finding substitutions. Geometry and spatial relations. Oh my goodness. Choose the correct sized bowl when you're going to be mixing a bunch of things together. Measurement and data. This is all over the place in baking, right? You measure volume, weight, time, and temperature over the course of baking cupcakes or cookies or a cake or bread or pretzels or anything like that. And playing games. There are people who think learning can be almost all fun and games, and I agree. Math is all over the game school way of learning. You can look for in-person games like sports, where you will see numeracy. You can count players. You'll see operations when you're adding up statistics. You'll see geometry in the arenas, and you'll see data in the data about sports. Board games, playing board games together. You'll see numeracy. You'll be counting how many spaces on the board or something like that. Algebra is part of strategy. Geometry, if you're doing puzzles, there's all sorts of geometry to discuss. And data, again, keeping score. Card games, whether it's Zeus on the Loose or just a simple game of war, there is plenty of counting and then comparing those numbers, which is algebra. And there are online games. Minecraft is big in my house. It's a sandbox play game that features geometry and spatial relations when players build using cubes. There's also a lot of numeracy and operations. My kid is learning all sorts of numbers and multipliers and things like that as he's building. And then there are online games like Prodigy, which is a role-playing game where the player has to answer math questions in order to cast spells. All right, so you have this math-rich life, and you need to know how to talk about it. You're going to be looking for numeracy, which is basically just the numbers, the names of the numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Operations in algebra, as an example, just the expressions more than and less than are great things for algebra. Plus all of the operations like addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. And there's also the phrase, let's figure it out. That's just straight up operations in algebra. And figuring stuff out and figuring it out together are great ways to think about math and talking about math. Geometry and spatial relations, you're looking for the names of shapes, which you know a lot of, and how those shapes fit together. Measurement and data. The important thing here is that in any measurement, there is a number and a unit, like 10 seconds or half of a teaspoon. And then categories. That's largely has to do with the data. So you have to come up with sensible categories when you're counting specific things, like the number of animals that you see outside. A lot of the words you need are in children's books, or you probably know a whole heck of a lot of them. So that's it for Everyday Mathematics Part 2. I've basically just kind of given you a rundown of the Boko Math lifestyle, which is a math-rich life that will support the whole family learning mathematics. In the next part of this series, I'm going to talk about what exactly to look for. I'm going to dive a little deeper into numeracy, operations in algebra, geometry and spatial relations, and measurement and data. Thanks a lot. All right, that's it for today. I bet you already have pieces of the Boko Math lifestyle that you didn't even know you were doing, but they're awesome. So get out there and keep doing what you're doing, or find something new to add into your everyday life and start looking for and noticing all that math. In the next video, I'll be a little bit more specific about what you really want to keep your eyes peeled for and what you should say about it when you see it. All right, see you next time. Bye.